And we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of the Wheelie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Atoll, and I'm joined again by Electrek's Seth Weintraub. How's it going, Seth?
I'm good.
Awesome. And we have a bunch of new, interesting e-bike and e-bike related stories to cover this week. Everything from new e-bike launches from companies like Urban Aero, Angway. Bosch had a new announcement. We've got some new motors and batteries from Bosch. We're going to take a look at some new electric bike charging stations that are solar powered, a pretty neat off-grid solution. There's an interesting analysis on why fatalities from e-bike fires are actually reducing in New York City after a few years of rising, and a few other stories as well. But where are we going to start with this week, Seth?
All right, today we're starting with Bosch announces its new e-bike motor and bigger batteries.
Excellent. Yeah, it's always fun when Bosch comes out with something new because they're obviously such a major force in the electric bike motor drive industry. Now, this isn't totally new. It's really more of an update to one of their main battery lines. This is the Performance Line CX motor drive system, which people have probably seen on a ton of Bosch e-bikes out there. This is one of their nicer, higher end motors compared to their a bit lower power, a bit more economical active line, and some of the other older models. The new version here, it has a lot of what we've come to know and love from Bosch, but everything's just a little bit better. They say it's a little bit quieter, a little bit more efficient. It's rated at 600 watts, which I think they didn't used to actually share the real peak watts with us. So it's nice to see that they're giving us sort of real numbers there, as opposed to what people have had to sort of figure out are the real numbers from like dyno tests and stuff. Now it's still obviously going to be a 250 watt motor classification. So what that means is that its continuous power is rated at 250 watts, and that will help it conform with all of the European regulations that require a maximum of 250 continuous watts. But what the peak power tells us is what is the power that you're actually feeling, when you really push on the pedals when you're in the highest power mode. What's that like seat of the pants feel? And so 600 watts is definitely on the higher end. It's not going to match a 750 watt motor like we're allowed in North America, or at least in the United States. I think Canada might still be 500 watts, but it's definitely going to be up there, and starting to challenge some of the Asian mid-drive makers that don't have to play by the same European rules. So that's definitely nice to see. On the torque side, I believe it's 80 or 85 Newton meters of torque, if I'm not mistaken. So
85.
this is a very 85. There we go. Thanks, Seth. So very torquey motor. This is obviously designed for mountain bikes and other bikes that really need that extra torque for when you're climbing up steep inclines, that sort of thing. Of course, Bosch is going to use a torque sensor, but in this case, like some of Bosch's other motors, we've got a nice mix of sensors. So there's the torque sensor, there's a cadence sensor, there's an inertial sensor. I assume there's probably still a speed sensor somewhere, whether it's on the wheel or inside the motor, or perhaps embedded into the chainstay. But it's a pretty sophisticated suite of sensors there that they use, all working together to decide how to apply that pedal assist, which is obviously one of the big differentiators between motor makers, because at a certain point, everyone's using kind of the same magnets, everyone's using basically the same copper wire. And so it's that programming that goes into how that power is delivered, which makes a big difference. And so that's a big part of the Bosch system, is how they've designed it to all work together. So it's great to see that as well. But it's not just the new Bosch Performance Line CX motor that they announced in this unveiling. There's also a set of new batteries. It's the new PowerTube 600 and 800 batteries. And the 800 is, I believe, the biggest battery that Bosch has made so far at 800 watt hours. That's getting up there with the like the juiced 4820 batteries that they make that are like 960 watt hours or so. So we're not quite there, but for Bosch, that's a big deal. I think previously the highest was 700, if I'm not mistaken. So another big jump here. And these are also the internal batteries. These are the ones that are designed to fit down inside the frame, which is very nice to see. Generally, there's going to be some sort of panel on one side, so it does drop out. But these are not like the Bosch batteries we often see that are just bolted onto the outside of the frame. These are those nicely integrated ones that different frame makers can sort of incorporate in different ways into their bikes, whether they're top loading, bottom loading, etc. So it's definitely nice to see Bosch pushing the capacity up a bit, because when you get into these powerful mountain bikes, that's where you really want to have that extra bit of range there. If you're just talking about a commuter, a more efficient bike, that sort of thing, at a certain point, 500-600 watt hours is going to be enough. But when you get into the dirt, especially if you're climbing hills, that sort of thing, those are the situations where an extra 100 or 200 watt hours can really make the difference between being able to stay out for an extra hour, kind of thing. So that's definitely nice to see. And then the last thing is they have that PowerMore 250 battery, which you can also add on. It basically is shaped like a water bottle, which a lot of companies have, and it just goes in the water bottle cage, and you can add 250 extra watt hours. So it's nice to see Bosch, keeping up, unveiling new products, both pushing more power, nicer upgrades, more efficient motors, and giving more options for the battery capacity. Of course, they're still updating. They're still keeping their lower capacity batteries up to date, as evidenced by that new PowerTube 600. But it's always cool to see them, expanding into either power or capacity areas that they haven't been yet. So to see 800 watt hours is nice for me. I know you do more mountain biking than I do, Seth. What do you think about these improvements?
It's great. I mean, obviously, Bosch is seeing competition on the specs piece from Bafang and the other Chinese automaker, or sorry, bike makers. So it's you know like Bosch is never going to win the specs race, right? Bafang's they have the Ultra's got more than 2 kilowatts of power if you get the right controller. So they're not going to ever beat that. But you get so much more with Bosch, the whole system. You mentioned like all the sensor suite. Everything's dialed in so much more with Bosch stuff. So um, they are, I guess, I would say, I don't want to say conceding, but like they are acknowledging the desire for more power out there. In the I don't want to say just in the North American market, because this is obviously a global thing. Mountain bikes are used off road, so there's not kind of the 250 watt uh, ceiling that most European countries kind of enforce. Um, that's 500 watts in Canada, 750 watts in the U.S. I mean, this line could be used in a U.S. street bike thing, and nobody would bat an eye. The other thing
Definitely.
with Bosch is like they don't have throttles, so you're you're not really getting all that power like all at once. Obviously, you're getting in addition to your pedaling, which is fantastic for fitness. Fantastic if you're a cycling enthusiast. But for those who kind of just want to throttle around, that's not something Bosch is like. That's just not their thing. So the 600. Or sorry, the higher power, as you said, means you need more battery to kind of uh, keep that on the trails longer. So it makes sense that as they're upping the power, they're also giving new batteries. 800 watt hours seems fine for a pedal assist bike. It seems actually pretty impressive. And then the PowerMore 250 extra, that puts you over a kilowatt hour of battery. So hard to complain about that. The other thing, the one thing I don't like fully, I'm not fully on board with is that the Purion 400 display kind of small for those of us with reading glasses. Um, not always helpful. The bigger screens are sometimes nice, especially with that. Like you don't need every piece of information, but like those pieces of information that are really tiny are pretty much invisible to me when I'm riding. So obviously, you can throw your phone on the bike as well, and use the Bosch app. So I don't know. All this stuff together is a nice yearly upgrade for mountain bikers. I think it's, you know, with Bosch owning what 50%, I would say, of the or more of the high end e-bike market. I think this will be a nice addition to a lot of mountain bikes out there. Do we have any early adopters that we know about?
I'm not sure which bikes are going to be using this yet. I'm sure all of the new flagship electric mountain bikes that use Bosch's system are going to jump to this right away, but I haven't heard of any specific ones yet.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll look forward to it. I can't wait to try it out.
Definitely.
All right. Let's move on. Urban Arrow launches updated Bosch powered electric cargo bikes in the US.
Yeah, speaking of Bosch, so Urban Arrow is, I believe it's a British-based cargo bike brand, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're based in England, and they make really high-end front-loading cargo bikes. So front loaders are those ones that look like they have a bathtub on the front of the bike, and so instead of having your handlebars go straight down into the front fork, you've got this big old tub in front of you, and then the front wheel is way out in front. So if you've never ridden one, the first time you hop on it, it takes a few minutes to sort of get used to like the point of steering in the front not being right below your hands. But they're actually super convenient for when you're taking, especially kids around, but also for any sort of cargo, because it not only does it hold it lower, so it keeps the center of gravity nice and low, but if you've got kids in there, then you can actually watch them and have more interaction with them while you're riding, as opposed to having them behind you, where you got to keep turning to look around to make sure they're not hopping out or fighting or throwing things or whatever kids do, I'm told. And so to me, it's like a really convenient design for cargo bikes. And it's exciting to see Urban Arrow launching their newest cargo bike in the U.S. because I feel like the U.S. is the next big market for these things. In Europe, they're widely adopted. It's kind of like the role of a minivan in the U.S. Like families just know that if you got a kid or maybe two or three kids at this point, it's time to upgrade to a cargo bike kind of thing. But these really nice cargo bikes just are at the very beginning of breaking through in the US. It's funny because I remember a few years ago when I was living in Boston, or actually in Cambridge, north of Boston, I was starting to see these bikes, and that seems like the area that is sort of the most like Euro liberal pocket kind of thing where these would be popular. So, it was funny to see these like Dutch style front loader cargo bikes in Cambridge, in Massachusetts, but I can see them starting to spread out in other cities. And Urban Arrow is obviously a leader in this specific style. There are other companies that make them. Reese and Moeller has, Yuba has, lots of company. I think even Tenway has a front loader now. But Urban Arrow is really known for these, and so it's nice to see this new one come to the U.S. here. It does make use of a lot of Bosch's nice features. You've got the built-in GPS tracking, that sort of thing, which is important with these expensive cargo bikes. I should point out these, depending on the model, they're somewhere between $6,000 to $7,000. So this is a significant investment, right? This is not your like direct-to-consumer $1,699 cargo bike. This is a very expensive like family vehicle type of cargo bike. So, to have the higher end components, to have the GPS tracking, that sort of thing is a big deal. It is nice to see that Urban Arrow does have two versions here. One has the belt drive, using Gates belt drive, some slightly nicer components. And so that one is the $7,000 one, I believe. And then there's a $6,000 version that has, slightly lower components. I think it's got a Shimano drivetrain. But all the important stuff, the brakes, the tires, the kid carrying box, all that stuff is pretty much the same from one to the other. So it's really more talking about the components here. But to me, this is just like the perfect way to move a family with small kids around. Once you get too big, it's it's a bit tricky. I've ridden these before with my wife in the front, and you can really only fit like one adult in these. You see them often with like two, three, four children, but one adult, I think is probably the max. Seth, we've tried riding these together a few times, right?
I was just going to mention, I feel like at a few bike shows, we've uh, traded places in these things. And it's a nice ride. Like it's kind of nice not to have to pedal sometimes and just enjoy the trip. The low center of gravity kind of keeps the balance pretty well. You can see that there's that big kickstand thing that allows you to load the kids in and out without having to worry about the bike flipping over or anything. Um, so I love these things, but like until there's like bike lanes that are guarded, like in the US, which is rare, I feel like these are going to be stunted. Like they're just not like people just don't feel safe enough on US roads for the most part. I'm generalizing here, but um I kind of feel like we're gonna never be as fully adopted as the Dutch or even other places in Europe where these things are everywhere, because there's just that fear that a car is just going to come barreling through the painted bike lane
Yeah,
stripe, like so it's one of those things where um, we say we have bike infrastructure by painting a line on the side of the road that and putting a bike uh, logo there. But I don't know that if I had two young, 2, 3-year-old kids, I would feel safe in that situation. So um,
yeah,
my feeling is that yes, these things are great. Yes, they're a little pricey, but like people spend that much on strollers, so a bike isn't that big of a stretch for me. And obviously, this you can go a lot farther and faster and more comfortable. So I like it. I think in the U.S. we're going to have a slower adoption curve because of our lack of infrastructure, like real bike infrastructure.
yeah. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, actually. I know, like, your kids are teens now, so you're a bit past this, but let's say when they were, of toddler age or whatever age you would, ride kids around in this, what would it take for you to feel comfortable, like, taking them to school in this, for example? Like, a painted bike lane, probably not ideal. A separate bike lane, bicycle pathways. Like when I was in Cambridge for a year, I would see people using these on what were like basically 5 foot wide pavement paths that just cut through parks and stuff, designed for bicycles. They weren't even on the road. Like, what would it take you
Right.
to feel comfortable taking your kids?
Yeah, I mean that's perfect, and I'm probably a bad example because I had a bike seat in the back, and I would take my kids like everywhere.
I think
But
it's a great example.
well, yeah, but I'm not like a litmus test of
Fair enough.
people. But yes, I would feel way more comfortable on a dedicated bike path or even one on the side of the road that had some sort of barrier, a curb barrier. I think that's kind of like those are table stakes in bike infrastructure. Is like you got to put something hard up so that when a car just somebody's like texting and they just start coming over to the side. I mean, there's all kinds of deaths all the time. We cover bikes. I see the news like, somebody in Albany just like a couple of weeks ago died because somebody was, in their pickup truck and they didn't, they weren't watching the road and they just came over and they killed him. And it's like, oh, that's murder. No, that's actually just a mistake and poor guy and whatever. So I don't love the bike lanes that are just paint. I feel like with the way people drive, I think we need curbs. Anyway, so to your original question, I would totally use one of these, even in uh, even without bike lanes. I would use one of these, but I'm again not a good litmus test for that.
Yeah, and one thing I think that is important to point out is that they do actually have, I think, 4-point harnesses in there for the
Yep,
kids, and they seem to be pretty well designed in terms of safety. Obviously, it's not a car with crumple zones and such, but it does seem like they've put a lot of thought and effort into making that front cargo box as safe as it can be.
yep, I agree. All right, let's move on. New low cost electric cargo bike promises 200 plus mile range and fast charging. Well, I know the 200 plus mile range thing we've heard before. So Let's get
Yeah.
to the brass
So
tacks.
this is sort of on the other end of electric cargo bikes. This is from a company called Angway, which is pretty representative of a lot of these Asian-based direct-to-consumer companies that have sort of a U.S. Front to the company. That they keep a U.S. warehouse and they ship from the U.S., but most of the operations, the customer service, and everything comes from some Asian headquarters. And so they're pretty representative of this like 14 to $1,800 electric cargo bike direct to consumer type company. Their newest model here, this is the LE20, claims a kind of crazy sounding 217 miles. And this is one of those cases where it's not totally bogus, but it's under very specific scenarios can this be possibly achieved. And basically, what this comes down to is battery capacity and how you ride the bike. There are two battery options here, and the one that is supposed to give this crazy mileage is the one that comes with two 48-volt 19.2 amp hour batteries. So you're talking about close to 2 kilowatt hours of capacity. If you ride that in the lowest pedal assist level, that would get you around 8 watt-hours per mile, which does get you close to 200 and some odd miles of range. So it's not like false advertising, but it is unlikely that most people will ride a bike like this heavy in the lowest power level and be able to do it for like 15 hours or whatever it would take to get 200 miles on this thing. So they're definitely not lying, but you got to understand what it would take for you to achieve that. So sort of crazy range rating aside, it does seem like another interesting sort of stretched Rad Runner esque addition to the market here. The Angway LE20. One thing that I do like about it that we don't see in a lot of these utility bikes is it does come with these cast rims. Basically, instead of having spokes on the wheels, you have 6 or 8 or however many they do here. I think it's 6 cast, usually from magnesium wheel rims. And that just means you never have to worry about spokes breaking, spokes loosening up, the wheel becoming untrue, that sort of thing. For a lot of people, that's a big advantage because it just removes one more maintenance thing. I feel like it used to be a little bit more important. Now spokes have gotten better, especially on e-bikes. Companies are using heavier gauge spokes, and it's less of an issue. 10 years ago, I used to work in an e-bike shop, and people would come in with like 10 out of their 36 spokes broken around a hub motor because a lot of companies were using the same spokes you'd use on a non-electric bike, and you just start ripping those spokes out after a year or so. So it's not as big a deal now, but I do like to see that. You give up some weight savings there. They are a bit heavier, but they're just really strong and really nice for maintenance. Another cool thing is that the company offers a pretty high power charger here, 8 amps, which is usually 2 to 3 times faster than a lot of the 2 to 3 amp chargers that you'll see with most direct to consumer Chinese e-bikes. So there are a few things on this bike that do set it apart, but for the most part, it's pretty much just a mid-tail, fairly powerful utility bike of the Rad Runner style that we've seen a lot of these. Nowadays there's so many, I'm not sure if it's even fair to, call it Rad Runner style. The Rad did kind of set that category in motion when they launched the Rad Runner. And so I think it is an interesting one to have in the market here. And it's also priced fairly well. It launches at a $1,499 early bird price. Now it may bump up, $100 or $200 eventually, though a lot of these companies end up just sticking with these prices because it's hard to raise the price and lose out on those sales afterwards. So for $1,500, you're talking about a super long range, class 3, 28 mile per hour, fairly powerful 1,300 watt peak rated e-bike here. Now Angway is not they're not known to have the same type of component level or service level as the higher end companies. This is definitely not an Urban Arrow like we just talked about. It's not a Turn. It's not a Trek. You're not gonna be able to get this in like a bike shop kind of situation. This is direct to consumer, so you got to know that going in. But we've reviewed a few of these Angways, and as a low cost, easy to work on bike, It's definitely up there among the more entry level companies. I I don't know if I would recommend it over like Electrek or something, just because with a company like Electrek or Rad that you've got a local customer support team in the US. Like you can email them, you can chat them on your time zone. You don't have to wait for answers, that sort of thing. But I am glad to see more entries like this in the market. What do you think, Seth? Something special or just sort of like another Rad Runner type bike?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of those out there. I think where this thing is going to come in nicely is that they're probably like it's 14.99 now. They may raise the price. I doubt it. But I've seen Angways come. I've seen Angways below $1,000 before. So I think this is likely to come down in price over the next few months, and this will be like kind of the lowest priced cargo bike you can get. The 14.99 price, does that include both batteries, or is that a one battery option right there?
It's a good point. That might just be the single battery to begin with, though it's still
Okay.
almost 1,000 watt hours, so it's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's still plenty. The other thing is, Angways often come, or I've seen them quite a bit, with the extra battery, at a still like a very low price. So, I think when you look at the spectrum of bike options, this is going to be the most bang for your buck, but a little bit more risk in that, as you mentioned, very little service, very little local support. But the company's been in business for a while. They've been selling bikes. We reviewed them. They're solid. The components are mid tier at best. But what you get here is a pretty good package, and obviously there's some fun accessories as well. So if you're the kind of person who feels comfortable with a bike that may not be supported super well, or may have medium level components, I think this is probably going to be a good price point for many. You mentioned the electric option, probably for the price and for the better support and the local company thing. They're based in Phoenix, I believe, right?
Yeah,
That might be
Electric. Yeah.
a better option. So, you know, uh, it's good to have this out there. This will probably be on Amazon, and I would say 5 or 6 months at around $1,000. That would be that would be my guess.
Yeah, if this was $1,000, it would be a pretty tough deal to pass up.
Right. Yeah. I let's see what happens. All right. Moving on. New off-grid solar-powered device can charge 12 electric bikes.
This one's pretty cool. It's from a company called Beam Global. They just unveiled it a couple days ago. Now, these are renderings we're looking at if you're watching the podcast video here with us. So I'm not sure they actually have a functional installed solar powered bike charging station like the ones that we're looking at, but this is the product that they're intending to roll out. It has, I think it's 4.4 kilowatts of solar panels in a canopy that covers the parking area. And then there are 12 parking spots that basically look like a bike rack, but each one has a 120-volt AC outlet on it. And so what that means is not only can you roll up and lock to it as secure parking, but if you bring your charger with you, then you can plug in and get a charge for as long as you're parked there. So for a lot of people who maybe, let's say this is on like a school campus or something, if you come in for an hour long class, you get there 15 minutes early, you leave a little bit after, you can get almost an hour and a half of charging, which is probably going to get you 30, 40, almost 50% of your battery charged, depending on how big your e-bike battery is and the size of your charger. Now this thing does have its own internal battery, and so it's going to work even when the sun's not shining. I think they have 20, 30, and 40 kilowatt hour battery options, so different sizes. And it's going to obviously generate its own energy while the sun is out, but that means it can be installed in places that are far from an electrical hookup, and it's easy for campuses or organizations to install it somewhere that they don't need to have an electrician come in and tie it into the grid power. I'm not entirely sure what the the business model is here exactly, because e-bikes use so little energy while charging that I can't imagine it would ever be profitable to offer charging as a service and try to make money off of that. I mean, you're talking about like 15 cents of electricity per charge. Like there's just no way to make money on the charging itself. But if Beam is, basically offering this as a product that companies can buy, let's say Google wants to make it really easy for people to, park their e-bikes and charge them outdoors while they're on the Google campus, then perhaps, there's something to be said for having this as like a turnkey solution that malls or universities or companies or local parks and recreation departments can buy and just set up very easily, basically anywhere, because it doesn't have to tap into local power, because it's basically a turnkey off-grid solution. So I think it could be a really interesting addition. Now we don't know how much it's going to cost, for the whole package. Ideally, you're not being charged money to charge there, because again, like it's you're talking about like pennies here worth of electricity. But the only other sort of criticism of this setup, which we've definitely heard of a lot, is that these 120 volt outlets, it's great to have them as an option, but it means you have to bring your wall charger with you, right? Like there's no standardization in e-bike charging, so it's not like a car charger where you just have like a J1772 or an NACS plug. Here you've got to bring your charger because there's like a dozen different e-bike charging plugs and there's different voltages, because this is DC. So if you've got a Bosch system, you're on 36. Most other e-bikes are on 48 or 52. And that's really limited, because if you don't want to travel around with this big brick in your bag, there's no other way to charge. The other thing is you have to find a way to lock your charger while you're there, if you don't want to take a chance of someone just walking by and stealing your charger, which actually had happened once when I was using a public outlet, actually for my rickshaw tricycle. Someone just stole my charger because I hadn't locked it. It was in a parking garage, but still, there was nothing to keep someone from just walking by and unplugging my tricycle and going off with the charger. So you'd have to have some sort of locking box, or I've seen people put the cable of their charger through like a nut or some other sort of round metal thing, and then
Yeah,
put
I've
a
seen that
cable
too.
through that. Um, Theoretically, you
So,
could just cut the cable and solder it back together, but that is
uh,
going to stop most people, I would say. But
what's the
yeah, I mean,
solution
it's
though?
it's a cool for locking.
Well,
I
just
think,
I mean, I guess we got to standardize on a charging mechanism, right? Some kind of
yeah,
48
I mean,
volt,
good luck with that.
right?
I mean, you got to
Or
standardize
maybe
on a
like a
voltage and
DC
a
thing, because
connector.
like the solar is DC, so you got to invert it, to AC and then back, so or rectify it. And so that's you're losing some power there. Not a big deal with e-bikes. I think it's pretty small amount of power you would be losing. But it's kind of like, as you mentioned, it's a hassle that like you got to carry around your brick. Um, I wonder if like integrating, like what if bikes started integrating the charger into the bike, where you would just plug in to a
Yeah, so that would
20.
be ideal, where all you have to do is plug in basically an extension cord. I mean, that's the way electric cars work theoretically, right? Like the chargers on
Mostly, yeah,
board, and a J1772 is just a fancy extension cord, right?
right,
So, I mean, that would be ideal. The problem is that these e-bike chargers are generally fairly fragile electronics. They're not meant to bounce around the way a
right.
bike is. I mean, you could solve that because there's a lot of electronics in an e-bike that are ruggedized. The speed controller and
But then
such
you
is
get
is
more
designed.
expensive, heavier, like all those things that you don't really want.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some e-bikes that actually have the charger built in. That company in Newport Beach, Electric Bike Company, that they build their bikes there. They have one model of battery that has like the old vacuums that have the like spool AC cord that come out of them.
Yep,
They've got that built into the bike, and you unspool it and plug in. So it's been done. It's not unheard of. It's just very uncommon.
right. Yeah, it's like, well, like let's see where we're going. I mean, I guess 48 volt would kind of seem like the right area of DC if you're going to have like a DC adapter, right? Like you don't really need it. I mean, there's 72 volt stuff out there for, the Surons, but 48 volt seems to be pretty good. I mean, there's some 52 volt things, but um, is there a 48 volt DC like standard? Is someone like, just is a generic barrel thing the way to go? Or, I mean, Bosch has this weird, crazy thing, and then there's the magnet stuff, and you
Yeah,
know,
I mean that's the problem is there's so many. I mean, you're right. So the 5.5 by 2.1 millimeter barrel is like the plurality, I would say, but even that
yes,
is probably, maybe 30 to 40% of bikes total. I mean, I think most of the cheaper bikes will use it, but then like you're saying, when you include like the Broza and the Bosch and all those others, they often have those fancier connectors. And then Bosch, I believe, is a 36 volt architecture. So
right,
then you got to have a different voltage
a
for
step
those,
down.
and oh, it's a mess.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. Unfortunately, I guess the answer is this, right? This is the best we
Yeah,
can
I
do.
mean, this is the most effective solution right now for sure, and that it gets the job done. But if you look at, so I guess the best example of this being done in bulk would be in China, where you have these types of street level 120 volt AC outlets all over the place. The difference there is that there's no theft of chargers because of like a societal differences where partly the extreme surveillance with so many cameras in the cities, but also like just this like sort of, I don't know if it's more respect for personal property or what, but like people just leave their chargers sitting on their bikes in China charging and no one steals it. So maybe it works there and it demonstrates that the concept works, but it totally depends on the people you're surrounded with. And if it's an area where someone's going to jack your charger, then you got to have some sort of lockbox or something.
Yeah, it's a conundrum. Um, the other thing, the one last thing I would mention is that city bikes in New York and some of the other municipal bike systems, I think Velibs as well in France and Paris, they have as part of their um, connecting mechanism a charging thing, and maybe that's the end game is like uh, you have a just like a universal like locking and charging mechanism that you can add to your bike, for instance. Maybe, it's not something that comes standard, but if you live in a city and you want to use this charging system that exists already, maybe you can do something like that. Obviously there's a lot of uh, things to think about there, but maybe if the cities and the leagues of the world open their racks up to third parties, maybe that would be an answer. Or if they commoditize their charging infrastructure, it would make sense.
Definitely.
All right, let's move on. E-bike fire deaths are plummeting in New York City, and here's the real reason why. Good to hear.
Yeah, this one is interesting to me because we've been hearing more and more about electric bicycle battery fires in the news. It's somewhat overreported, in my opinion, just based
Mm,
on the sheer number. But if it bleeds, it leads, and so a lot of places report on these. But interestingly, despite sort of New York City being known as the epicenter because of just how many e-bikes there are there, and especially some of these more lower cost budget e-bikes used by all the delivery riders, but despite there being more e-bikes than ever on New York streets, this year we've actually seen a big drop in e-bike battery fire fatalities. In 2023, there were 14 fatalities, and so far in 2024, there have only been four. We still have 3 months left, but we're on track for a significant reduction, which is great news. But it begs the question, why? Like, how did that turn around? Now, with this small of a number, it's you potentially into sample size bias and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, there have been some major differences this year that can contribute to this very promising trend. First of all, we're well into New York City's ban on non-UL listed batteries, and so What that means is that New York City basically stops at the border any e-bikes that don't meet UL, or I think they expanded it to some other, like SGS and other internationally recognized battery testing standards. And so that prevents a lot of those super, super cheap batteries from coming in that were popular among lower income, especially these delivery riders. Not to single them out in any unfair way. I certainly understand that when your livelihood is riding your bike around, delivering packages or food all day, that every dollar counts, and it's important to save money where you can. But it was those super cheap batteries that were often produced by unscrupulous factories that were cutting corners on safety. And so that's helped get a lot of those out. New York City has also had a really big educational push on trying to get people to not charge their batteries, indoors, under their bed, in their living room, that sort of thing. Not only has there been this educational push, but the city has also installed a number of outdoor charging areas. Not quite as fancy as the Beam, solar powered outdoor charging that we saw just a few minutes ago in that new product, but we've seen a number of these cabinet style, kind of like the Gogoro cabinets, but a little more sort of like electrical box looking. Usually they're enclosed, and their little door opens up, and you can put a battery in and either charge it off of a DC plug that's already correct for that battery, or a situation where there's just a 120-volt AC outlet, and you can lock your charger in that box with the battery. There have been several of those installed. There are two companies that I think New York City has been working with on those. One is called Swabi, Swobbee. I think it's a German company, if I'm not mistaken. They're active all over Europe, I believe in South America as well. And so it's cool to see New York City working with them on this pilot to test those charging cabinets. There's another, I want to say it's called Pop Wheels or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So New York City's, they're not only like dancing with one partner here, they're trying out a lot of solutions to try and find ways to help people charge outdoors, and not put themselves in a situation where if there is a battery fire, that it's more likely to lead to injuries or deaths. New York City has also stepped up enforcement of these bike shops, and especially battery repair shops, which were a major contributor to some of these fires, because with so many e-bikes out there on the streets, eventually, batteries are going to break, and there are going to be people looking to get these things repaired. But if a repair shop is, not operating with the right tools, or they don't have the right training, then it can be very dangerous to open up these batteries and start poking around without the necessary experience or knowledge. So I think I've heard of something like 250 plus inspections that the city inspectors and the fire department has made to battery shops and bike shops in the city this year so far. So they're not just paying lip service to this issue. They're really sort of tackling this from many different aspects, from regulatory to enforcement to education to providing the resources to allow people to charge in safer locations. So from all these different aspects, it's really great to see that the efforts that the city has put into this seem to be really paying off in the reduced number of injuries and deaths. Though it's important to repeat that this is a very small number to begin with. Talking about 14 deaths last year and 3 so far here. I think the figure that I often point out here is that you're like 3 times more likely to die from choking and 5 times more likely to die on the subway in New York City. So keep that
Yeah,
in mind.
so I was gonna have a contrarian point of view on this. I also think it's overreported, but I think some of the scare tactics that have been used to, gain eyeballs, may have affected some New Yorkers, and you know, people don't want their apartment to catch on fire, right? So they're like, "Hey, I like e-biking. I like to charge in my apartment. Should I buy this, battery off Alibaba right now, or should I maybe think about getting a battery that's maybe a little bit more expensive, but not going to burn my house down?" So I think maybe that those scare tactics that we don't, we know the numbers don't add up, like report other deaths equally. Um, may have rubbed off on some New Yorkers. I know me personally, like I don't want a cheap bike battery charging anywhere near my where I sleep. So, like for instance, when we get things to review that maybe I don't think are super safe, I charge them in our barn. So, that thing can burn down and, thank God. So, for my thing, I think all the things that you mentioned are definitely parts of it, but I think there's also the part where people don't want you know, a basically a bomb in their house that may, catch on fire in the middle of the night. And the fact that the press has been very vocal about these fires, and New York has been, to their credit, they've been like ahead of and I'm saying ahead of the U.S., the rest of the U.S. and kind of getting ahead of battery fires. We did talk to battery expert Luke uh, Powell. Is that his last name?
Workhorse.
Workhorse. Um, and he
No,
mentioned that
Workman. Sorry,
Workman,
Workman.
yeah, that
Yes.
Workhorse is a
the,
EV
the EV brand.
manufacturer. Yeah, they all run together. He did mention that New York City is kind of the perfect storm of salt water because of the salt on the roads, the vapor getting into batteries and stuff like that. So New York is kind of in a bad place to begin with, but they did, to their credit, get kind of I don't want to say ahead of it, but they kind of moved forward on making the batteries a little bit or a lot more safe. And then, you know, as I was saying, I think also it's people don't want a fire hazard where they sleep or where their kids are sleeping. So push and pull. Good to see it regardless,
Definitely.
right?
Definitely.
All right. And we have some questions and comments in the comments section. So if you guys have anything else to say that we'll address after this last post, please do it now. And our final story of the week is electric scooter giant Gogoro cleared of fraud charges after investigation.
Yeah, so speaking of sort of charging on the street, if you're not familiar, Gogoro is basically the world leader in battery swapping, mostly for electric scooters, mopeds, and light electric motorcycles. These are bigger batteries. They're around twice the capacity, maybe a little bit more than the average electric bicycle battery. But their system is designed to work with, thousands and thousands, I mean, actually millions of these distributed batteries all over whatever market that they operate in. And so they've been quite successful at expanding the company, but they've run into some I don't know if financial issues is the right term, but they've had a few struggling quarters trying to make this system profitable. At the same time, just a few weeks ago, they were accused of potential subsidy fraud in their domestic market of Taiwan because apparently there was a component of one of their scooter models that was not produced locally. I believe it was claimed that it came from China, yet the company was receiving subsidies from the Taiwanese government for having like purely domestic manufacturing or achieving a certain percentage of domestic manufacturing, at least of all the major components in these. And so at the time, the CEO stepped down. The company admitted that there was an anomaly in their supply chain, that they unintentionally used one of these foreign components. But we just heard a few days ago that after a government review, they were cleared of any purposeful wrongdoing, that essentially this was an accident. Now, it turns out this is actually related to a former investigation. It appears this might have happened more than once. So it does appear this is on a separate model than the case that we just learned about a couple weeks ago. But basically, the government said that there isn't any evidence, or there isn't sufficient evidence to say that the company was actually trying to, you know, pull the wool over the government's eyes here, and that it does appear to have been a sort of a record-keeping mistake on parts acquisition. There was also one component on just a portion of a single model that the company makes, and they make many models of these scooters. So it might have been kind of overblown when it got picked up as this like big fraud thing when really it was just sort of like a record keeping mistake. We are still waiting on the results of what's probably a second investigation to learn more, but it seems like it could have been another similar situation here. So on the one hand, like obviously you want to know that a big company like this knows where all of their stuff is coming from, but it does seem like it was more of a record keeping issue. And it's good to see that this might not have been the big scandal that I think some in the press were making this out to be, especially because, at least for me, I'm really positive on what Gogoro is doing, because I just think it's such an incredible system, especially when you add in the issue of people, needing to be able to charge batteries at home, and the safety, that sort of thing. That because you've got all these distributed chargers outdoors, it just makes the system that much safer. I've never heard of a Gogoro fire, and they've got, I think they're coming on close to 2 million batteries produced. So they build these things really well, and I don't think that that's an issue. But it also means that someone who's using the Gogoro system doesn't have to rely on a cheaper, inferior quality battery that they're charging at home under their bed, sort of thing. So I'm glad to see the Gogoro is probably clear in this situation. It's unfortunate that the CEO had to step down, but it's starting to look like that might have been more related to the financial performance of the company in the last few quarters than any potential like nefarious fraud issues, which don't seem to be the case.
Well, I was just going to ask, is there a possibility that he could be reinstated after clearing his, or is this kind of water under the bridge there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it seems like a big matzo ball hanging out there to go back on, so to speak. And
Right.
it does, like, at this point, like, like I said, I think it's probably more related to what might have been questions about leadership direction that would have led to some several $1 million losses over the last few quarters, when the company is trying to prove a profitable model here, as opposed to being more related to this potential fraud investigation.
Yeah, I mean, still sad to see. Like, it's always, it kind of feels like when a founder leaves a company, it's always like a little bit questionable how they're going to do and what direction they're going to go. And especially Gogoro is such a kind of important uh, company, I think, especially as we move forward in like this new world of mobility. Um, so I guess we'll keep an eye there. It is good that they're kind of being cleared at least of these initial charges. All right,
Absolutely.
let's move into questions. We got quite a few, but there's still time to ask if you guys have any questions. Extra Hero says, "Could you guys make the show weekly, or would that be too expensive?" Well, it's not really that expensive to make the show, but just the amount of e-bike news versus car news in general is a little bit lower. So um, we kind of feel like the perfect thing is bi-weekly, but we're open to it. Maybe we get some more information, or I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as the industry continues to grow, maybe at some point it is like, wow, there's so much stuff in the past 2 weeks. We gotta adapt. But yeah, at this point, I mean, I see how much you guys have to talk about on the car Electrek podcast, and it's the industries aren't quite at the same level of
Not
maturity.
quite, no. All right, Extra Hero, did you guys see that the electric expedition now comes in colors? Not as impressive as the Hey Bike haulers colors, but it's good to see something other than white. I feel like we knew that, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, they were described, I believe, as a limited edition, and I think are actually already sold out, which on the one hand shows that they were probably pretty popular. But I'm not sure if it's something that's going to stick around or not. Some companies use limited edition to test the waters. And
Right.
so if they sold out pretty quickly, then maybe Electric realizes that it's something people want.
Yeah.
In several of my conversations with Levi, it's pretty obvious that for their model to work as well as it does, they have to be careful with this like SKU proliferation, where you end up with like 1,000 different products. And
Right.
so I think that's what's limited them to not come out with too many different color variations on each bike, because it helps them to stay more efficient and
Yep.
agile, and not stock literally dozens of unique e-bike models. So I'm not sure if they're set up yet to have that many colors, but I would love to see it, because that's the one thing that they're they're really missing compared to a lot of these other companies that have just such cool, fun e-bike colorway options to choose from.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. Electric scooters are easy to use and eco-friendly. Thank you, Facebook. Will we ever see a budget version of the Urban Arrow style e-bike? I'm trying to think what's the least expensive like bucket bike that I've ever seen, and they're all high end. And you kind of want them to be high end, right? Like you don't want to throw your kids in a bucket that's going to fall off the side or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm trying to think like what is the thing that makes those jump up so much in price? And I think sort of like tadpole trikes, it's the steering mechanism being
I was just
so
going to say, yeah,
unique and complicated that they don't get to take advantage of economies of scale in the same way because there are a bunch of unique parts to that. And so and it's kind of a a niche bike design, so they're not filling up bike shops with those things. So
and
both of
shipping is
those
not
really
cheap,
bump the price. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're shipping a refrigerator box at that point almost.
basically. Yeah,
And so, yeah, I think the 10 ways one might have been the cheapest. I forget how much it was. I wanna say maybe like $5,000. Don't quote me on that. Look
yeah.
up 10 ways front loader. I think that might have been the closest to budget so far.
I saw a couple. I don't know if they were Urban Arrows or which, but I saw a few at Upway. That's that kind of bicycle refurbisher in Brooklyn and also in Europe. And I feel like they were starting at a lower price point. So, I mean, maybe that's an option if you're budget
Yeah, that
constrained
would
and you
be
need something like that. And the thing is, like, you know, these are for small kids, and your kids are only small for a few years. So there's going to be a secondary market for these things.
definitely.
So maybe that's the way to go. Maybe that's where you find your lower priced ones. Cargo bike mama has been safely riding around New York with her babies in her Urban Arrow since before 2020. More power to her. Good for her. I think that's really great. A great person for y'all to interview is Chris Nolte, friend of the show. We both love Chris. With a Propel Bike channel, runs a cargo bike store in New York, and has started a new company to produce e-bikes in the U.S. We should dial up Chris. We haven't talked to him in a while. He also has a store in Long Beach, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I'm overdue for a call with Chris. Uh, we see eye to eye on a lot of things. What are your all's thoughts on EVgo charging getting the $1 billion from the Department of Energy and Exro Technologies nominated for Stellantis Supplier of the Year Innovative Motor Control Technology? Well, I think EVgo is more of a car charging thing, so maybe wait for the evening podcast on that one. We'll be around at 4 o'clock Eastern.
That explains why
So
I'm so ignorant about them. That's good.
is it odd that Rad has still not come out with a single dual battery e-bike? Um, I mean, I
Hmm.
guess all their bikes are dual battery because you can just buy another battery and put them on there, right?
Yeah, but it's not like the electric expedition where there's a second port where if you wanted to run two at once, you don't have to stop and swap out batteries sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess
Um,
Rad is kind of simplicity is their one of their things. They're not really gonna have like a dual battery controller.
yeah, I mean, Rad is rarely. Maybe that's not fair. I was gonna say they've rarely like been the first mover on things, which is not true because they have a few times, but they've also definitely waited out some common additions to the industry. It took them forever to adopt, hydraulic brakes, and there have been times where they've sort of like waited to watch to see the direction that other companies are gonna, if they're gonna commit to something. And so maybe we'll eventually see a dual a dual battery e-bike. It wouldn't surprise me because Rad really likes upsell opportunities. There's a lot of
Right.
money in accessories. There's money in a second battery, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, even just a slot like to put like a bottle battery or something.
Yeah, some e-bikes have like a dummy slot where at least there's a place for it and it might not be electrically connected, but it's mounted.
Right. All right. I've never seen an e-bike promoted more on YouTube than Engway. So many reviewers and non-reviewers are sent their bikes. Yes, they are very aggressive with that. That seems to be their marketing uh, way to go, which is good. Like, YouTubers are good at reviewing stuff, and We're no different. On Gogoro, got a great review from MIT. I think e-bikes and scooters, maybe even motorcycles, should have swappable batteries. Yeah, we've talked about in the past, like, could Gogoro be used as a e-bike battery? They're just a little bit boxier. Like, you would have to kind of, I don't know where exactly you would put that on an e-bike, but it would be kind of interesting to see if that would be possible. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually talked about that a little bit with Horace when I was there in Taiwan earlier this year, just sort of in passing. And what he said was that, like, technologically it would be super easy. Really, it's just the packaging that's the issue, because they make the receptacle that
Hmm.
allows other companies to um, basically receive the signal from the battery, talk to it, and they make it as easy as possible for other companies to build around their battery, because that's really their business model. They don't just want to sell scooters; they want to provide a battery as a service. And so, like, it would be possible, but it's this weird shape to fit on a bike. It's very, like, wide. It's like a cuboid, an elongated cuboid, I guess.
Yeah.
Rectangular prism. That's it.
Okay. Did we ever get this specialized, the Globe Hall?
No, my I had a PR guy there, but he left, so I need to get a new connection at Specialized and see if they'll let me borrow a haul, because yeah, that's a very interesting bike that I would love to try. Or maybe we'll
Yeah, I
send one
saw
up to
that
you and you can
at a local bike store. Looks like a great bike.
yeah.
Beam solar chargers are pretty cool too. I've seen a local government adopt them in my area, so I'm assuming that's like the solar charger we talked about. Have you heard of Beam?
Yes. Yeah, that's the one we talked about. I think
Oh, okay.
I think they had car chargers, which I don't know if that's what you're talking about, Inner, but I know they've rolled out, I think, solar powered car chargers before. I don't know if they've done bike chargers yet,
Okay,
other than the ones that they just unveiled a few days ago in the renderings.
gotcha. Where in the US might be the best location to adopt Gogoro scooters and battery swapping? I'm a big fan as well. New
I
York
think
obviously would be a place, right?
Yeah, in New York, but I think Southern California would probably be the only other place where there would be enough riders to even get close. First of all, there's nowhere good in the US for it yet. Let's start with that. We're talking about the best of not great options, not because it's not a good solution, but because it's not a problem that needs to be solved in the US yet. The ridership is just not big enough in the motorcycle community for there to be enough electric scooter riders out there that are like, where am I going to charge this thing? In Indonesia, where everybody is on a motorbike, it's different. But in the US, it's just the density of riders is not high enough to make it work yet. But I think Southern California, where it's all year riding weather, and there actually are motorcycle riders, and you get the benefit of lane splitting and that sort of thing. I think that would probably be the place to start.
Yep. All right. Thanks for the info. And this podcast is mostly about e-bikes and other small electric vehicles. We sometimes cover small four-wheel vehicles, neighborhood electric vehicle type things, and green energy and stuff like that, but mostly e-bikes.
Yep.
That's all for the
And
questions.
awesome. Well, we're glad to have you all. Thank you, those of you who joined in the comments, and to everybody else at home on the way to work or wherever you've been watching. I will be glad to have you back here in another 2 weeks for the next episode of the Wheelie Podcast. See you next time, everyone.